Welcome back to this channel where I read and you hopefully read along, but likely just sit back and listen. And we're back today to Shortcuts, a collection of short stories by Raymond Carver. We'll get right into it. This one's called So Much Water, So Close to Home. My husband eats with good appetite, but he seems tired, edgy. He chews slowly, arms on the table, and stares at something across the room. He looks at me and looks away again. He wipes his mouth on the napkin. He shrugs and goes on eating. Something has come between us, though he would like me to believe otherwise. What are you staring at me for? He asks. What is it? He says and puts his fork down. Was I staring? I say, and shake my head stupidly. Stupidly. The telephone rings. Don't answer it, he says. Might be your mother, I say. Dean, it might be something about Dean. Watch and see, he says. I pick up the receiver and listen for a minute. He stops eating. I bite my lip and hang up. What did I tell you? He says. He starts to eat again, then throws the napkin onto his plate. God damn it, why can't you people mind your own business? Tell me what I did wrong and I'll listen. It's not fair. She was dead, wasn't she? There were other men there besides me. We talked it over and we all decided. We'd only just got there. We'd walked for hours. We couldn't just turn around. We were 5 miles from the car. It was opening day. What the hell? I don't see anything wrong. No, I don't. And don't look at me that way. Do you hear? I won't have you passing judgment on me. Not you. You know, I say and shake my head. I say and shake my head. What do I know, Claire? Tell me. Tell me what I know. I don't know anything except one thing. You hadn't better get work you hadn't better get worked up over this. He gives me what he thinks is a meaningful look. She was dead. Dead, dead. Do you hear? He says after a minute. It's a damn shame, I agree. She was a young girl, and it's a shame. And I'm sorry. As sorry as anyone else. But she was dead, Claire. Dead. Now let's leave it alone. Please, Claire, let's leave it alone. That's the point, I say. She was dead. But don't you see? She needed help. I give up, he says, and raises his hands. He pushes his chair away from the table, takes his cigarettes, and goes out to the patio with a can of beer. He walks back and forth for a minute and then sits in a lawn chair, picks up the paper once more. His name is there on the first page along with the names of his friends, the other men who made this grisly find. I close my eyes for a minute and hold on to the drain board. Must not dwell on this any longer. I must get over it, put it out of sight, out of mind, etc., and go on. I open my eyes. Despite everything, knowing all that may be in store, I rake my arm across the drain board and send the dishes and glasses smashing and scattering across the floor. He doesn't move. I know he's heard. He raises his head as if listening, but he doesn't move otherwise, doesn't turn around to look. I hate him for that, for not moving. He waits a minute, then draws on his cigarette and leans back in his chair. I pity him for listening, detached, and then settling back and drawing on his cigarette. The wind takes the smoke out of his mouth in a thin stream. Why do I notice that? He can never know how much I pity him for that, for sitting still and listening and letting the smoke stream out of his mouth. He planned his fishing trip into the mountains last Sunday, a week before the Memorial Day weekend. He and Gordon Johnson, Mel Dorn, Vern Williams. They play poker, bowl, and fish together. They fish together every spring and early summer, the first 2 or 3 months of the season, before family vacations, Little League baseball, and visiting relatives can intrude. They are decent men, family men, responsible at their jobs. They have sons and daughters who go to school with our son, Dean. On Friday afternoon, these four men left for a 3-day fishing trip to the Natchez River. They parked the car in the mountains and hiked several miles to where they wanted to fish. They carried their bedrolls, food, and cooking utensils, their playing cards, their whiskey. The first evening at the river, even before they could set up camp, Meldorn found the girl floating face down in the river, nude, lodged near the shore in some branches. He called the other men, and they all came to look at her. They talked about what to do. One of the men, Stuart didn't say which, perhaps it was Vern Williams. He is a heavy set, easy man who laughs often. One of them thought they should start back to the car at once. The others stirred the sand with their shoes and said they felt inclined to stay. They pleaded fatigue, the late hour, the fact that the girl wasn't going anywhere. In the end, they all decided to stay. They went ahead and sat up. Oh, that's kind of weird. Ugh, that's how can that scene happen and then they just choose to ignore it? If I'm getting this correctly. Anyway, they went ahead and set up the camp and built a fire and drank their whiskey. Yeah, no, that you can't drink whiskey by a fire after you've just seen that. That's awful. I drank a lot of whiskey, and when the moon came up, they talked about the girl. Someone thought they should be doing something to prevent the body from floating away. Somehow they thought that this might create a problem for them if it floated away during the night. They took flashlights and stumbled down the river. The wind was up, a cold wind, and waves from the river lapped the sandbank. One of the men, I don't know who, might have been Stuart, he could have done it, waded into the water and took the girl by the fingers and pulled her, still face down, closer to the shore, into shallow water, and then took a piece of nylon cord and tied it around her waist, and then secured the cord to tree roots. All the while the flashlights of the other men played over the girl's body. Oh. Afterwards, they went back to the camp and drank more whiskey. Then they went to sleep. The next morning, Saturday, they cooked breakfast, drank lots of coffee, more whiskey, and then split up to fish. 2 men upriver, 2 men down. The night, after they had cooked their fish and potatoes, had more coffee and whiskey, they took their dishes down to the river and rinsed them off a few yards from where the body lay in the water. Disgusting. They drank again. I find it hard to believe that this scene can take place. Like they're too unfazed by a dead body. They drank again, and then they took out their cards and played and drank until they couldn't see the cards any longer. Vern Williams went to sleep, but the others told coarse stories and spoke of vulgar or dishonest escapades out of their past, and no one mentioned the girl until Gordon Johnson, who'd forgotten for a minute, commented on the firmness of the trout they'd caught and the terrible coldness of the river water. They stopped talking, then continued to drink until one of them tripped and fell, cursing the lantern, and then they climbed into their sleeping bags. The next morning they got up late, drank more whiskey, fished a little as they kept drinking whiskey. Then at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Sunday, a day earlier than they'd planned, they decided to leave. They took down their tents, rolled their sleeping bags, gathered their pans, pots, fish, and fishing gear, and hiked out. They didn't look at the girl again before they left. When they reached the car, they drove the highway in silence until they came to a telephone. Stuart made the call to the sheriff's office while the others stood around in the hot sun and listened. He gave the man on the other end of the line all their names. They had nothing to hide. They weren't ashamed of anything. I would be. And agreed to wait at the service station until someone could come for more detailed direction and individual statements. He came home at 11 o'clock that night. I was asleep but woke when I heard him in the kitchen. Found him leaning against the refrigerator drinking a can of beer. He put his heavy arms around me and rubbed his hands up and down my back, and the same hands he'd left with 2 days before, I thought. In bed he put his hands on me again and then waited, as if thinking of something else. I turned slightly and then moved my legs. Afterward, I know he stayed awake for a long time, for he was awake when I fell asleep, and later, when I stirred for a minute, opening my eyes at a slight noise, a rustle of sheets. It was almost daylight outside, birds were singing, and he was on his back smoking and looking at the curtained window. Half asleep I said his name, but he didn't answer. I fell asleep again. He was up this morning before I could get out of bed, to see if there was anything about it in the paper, I suppose. The telephone began to ring shortly after 8 o'clock. "Go to hell," I heard him shout into the receiver. The telephone rang a minute later, and I hurried into the kitchen. I've nothing else to add to what I've already said to the sheriff. That's right. He slammed down the receiver. What is going on? I said, alarmed. Sit down, he said, slowly. His fingers scraped against his stubble of whiskers. I have to tell you something. Something happened while we were fishing. We sat across from each other at the table, and then he told me. I drank coffee and stared at him as he spoke. Then I read the account in the newspaper that he shoved across the table. Unidentified girl, 18 to 24 years of age. Body 3 to 5 days in the water. Rape, a possible motive. Preliminary results show death by strangulation. Cuts and bruises on her breast and pelvic area. Autopsy. Rape. Pending further investigations. You've got to understand, he said. Don't look at me like that. Be careful now, I mean it. Take it easy, Claire. Why didn't you tell me last night? I asked. I just didn't. What do you mean? He said. You know what I mean, I said. I looked at his hands, the broad fingers, knuckles covered with hair, moving, lighting a cigarette now, fingers that have moved over me, in, into me last night. He shrugged. What difference does it make? Last night, this morning? It was late. You were sleepy. Thought I'd wait until this morning to tell you. He looked out to the patio. A robin, a robin, a robin flew from the lawn to the picnic table and preened its feathers. It isn't true, I said. You didn't leave her there like that. He turned quickly and said, What'd I do? Listen to me carefully now, once and for all. Nothing happened. I've nothing to be sorry for or feel guilty about. Do you hear me? I got up from the table and went to Dean's room. He was awake in his pajamas, putting together a puzzle. I helped him find his clothes, then went back to the kitchen and put his breakfast on the table. The telephone rang 2 or 3 more times, and each time Stewart was abrupt while he talked and angry when he hung up. He called Mel Dorn and Gordon Johnson and spoke with them, slowly, seriously. Then he opened a beer and smoked a cigarette while Dean ate, asked him about school, his friends, etc., exactly as if nothing had happened. Dean wanted to know what he'd done while he was gone, and Stewart took some fish out of the freezer to show him. I'm taking him to your mother's for the day, I said. Sure, Stewart said and looked at Dean, who was holding one of the frozen trout. If you want to, and he wants to, that is. You don't have to, you know. There's nothing wrong. I'd like to anyway, I said. Can I go swimming there? Dean asked, and wiped his fingers and his on his pants. I believe so, I said. It's a warm day, so take your suit. I'm sure your grandmother will say it's okay. Stewart lighted a cigarette and looked at us. Dean and I drove across town to Stewart's mother. She lives in an apartment building with a pool and a sauna bath. Her name is Catherine Kane. Her name, Kane, is the same as mine, which seems impossible. You're... That's a good line, actually. I like that. Years ago, she she has told me she used to be called Candy by her friends. She is a tall, cold woman with white blonde hair. She gives me the feeling that she is always judging. I explain briefly in a low voice what has happened. She hasn't yet read the newspaper, and promised to pick Dean up that evening. He brought a swimming suit, I say. Stuart and I have to talk about some things, I added vaguely. She looked at me steadily from over her glasses. Then she nods and turns to Dean, saying, How are you, my little man? She stoops and puts her arms around him. She looks at me again as I open the door to leave. She has a way of looking at me without saying anything. When I return home, Stuart is eating something at the table and drinking beer. After a time, I sweep up the broken dishes and glassware and go outside. Stuart is lying on his back on the grass now, the newspaper and can of beer within reach, staring at the sky. It's breezy but warm out, and birds call. Stuart, could we go for a drive? I say. Anywhere. He rolls over and looks at me and nods. We'll pick up some beer, he says. Hope you're feeling better about this. Try to understand. That's all I ask. He gets to his feet and touches me on the hip as he goes past. Give me a minute and I'll be ready. We drive through town without speaking. Before we reach the country, he stops at a roadside market for beer. I notice a great stack of papers just inside the door. On the top step, a fat woman in a print dress holds out a licorice stick to a little girl. In a few minutes, we cross Everson Creek and turn into a picnic area a few feet from the water. The creek flows under the bridge and into a large pond a few hundred yards away. There are a dozen or so men and boys scattered around the banks of the pond under the willows, fishing. So much water, so close to home. Why did he have to go miles away to fish? Why did you have to go there, of all places? I say. The Notches? We always go there. Every year, at least once. We sit on a bench in the sun, and he opens two cans of beer and gives one to me. How the hell was I to know anything like that would happen? Shakes his head and shrugs, as if it had all happened years ago, or to someone else. Enjoy the afternoon, Claire. Look at this weather. They said they were innocent. Who? Who are you talking about? The Maddox brothers. They killed a girl named Arlene Hubley near the. Oh, maybe they killed a girl named Arlene Hubley near the town where I grew up, and then cut off her head and threw her into the Clay Elum River. She and I went to the same high school. It happened when I was a girl. What a hell of a thing to be thinking about, he says. Come on, get off it. You're going to get me riled in a minute. How about it now? Claire? I look at the creek. I float toward the pond, eyes open, face down, staring at the rocks and moss on the creek bottom until I am carried into the lake where I am pushed by the breeze. Nothing will be any different. We will go on and on and on and on. We will go on even now, as if nothing had happened. I looked at him across the picnic table with such intensity that his face drains. I don't know what's wrong with you, he says. I don't. I slap him before I realize. I raise my hand, wait a fraction of a second, and then slap his cheek hard. This is crazy, I think as I slap him. We need to lock our fingers. We need to lock our fingers together. We need to help one another. This is crazy. He catches my wrist before I can strike again and raises his own hand. I crouch, waiting and see something come into his eyes and then dart away. He drops his hand. I drift even faster around and around in the pond. Come on, get in the car, he says. I'm taking you home. No, no, I say, pulling back from him. Come on, he says. God damn it. You're not being fair to me, he says later in the car. Fields and trees and farmhouses fly by outside the window. You're not being fair. To either of us. Or to Dean, I might add. Think about Dean for a minute. Think about me. Think about someone else besides your goddamn self for a change. Oh, this is classic sort of kind of like manipulative and toxic behavior. He's all the characters, if anyone's been listening to all these short stories, this might be maybe I think the fourth one we're doing now. And all the characters, they're very, very similar. They're all sort of they have this kind of self-destructive quality, and they're not they don't strike me as bad people, but they're just people who might be down on their luck, and they're clearly hanging out with other people down on their luck, and it seems to be self-perpetuating cycle of that. But anyways, back to this story. There's nothing I can say to him now. He tries to concentrate on the road, but he keeps looking into the rearview mirror. Out of the corner of his eye, he looks across the seat to where I sit, with my knees drawn up under my chin. The sun blazes against my arm and the side of my face. He opens another beer while he drives, drinks from it, then shoves the can between his legs and lets out breath. He knows. I could laugh at his face. I could weep. Stuart believes he is letting me sleep this morning, but I was awake long before the alarm sounded, thinking, lying on the far side of the bed, away from his hairy legs and his thick, sleeping fingers. He gets Dean off for school. He gets Dean off for school, okay? And then he shaves, dresses, and leaves for work. Twice he looks into the bedroom and clears his throat, but I keep my eyes closed. In the kitchen, I find a note from him signed Love. I sit in the breakfast nook in the sunlight and drink coffee and make a coffee ring on the note. The telephone has stopped ringing. That's something. No more calls since last night. I look at the paper and turn it this way and that on the table. Then I pull it close and read what it says. The body's still unidentified, unclaimed, apparently unmissed. But for the last 24 hours, men have been examining it, putting things into it, cutting, weighing, measuring, putting back again, sewing up, looking for the exact causes and moment of death, looking for evidence of rape. I'm sure they hope for rape. Rape would make it easier to understand. The papers the paper says the body will be taken to Keith and Keith Funeral Home pending arrangements. People are asked to come forward with information, etc. Two things are certain. One, people no longer care what happens to other people. And two, nothing makes any real difference any longer. Look at what has happened. Yet nothing will change for Stuart and me. Really change, I mean. We will grow older, both of us. You can see it in our faces already. In the bathroom mirror, for instance. Mornings when we use the bathroom at the same time. And certain things around us will change, become easier or harder, one thing or the other. But nothing will ever really be any different. I believe that. We have made our decisions. Our lives have been set in motion, and they will go on until they stop. But if that is true, then what? I mean, what if you believe that, but you keep it covered up until one day something happens that should change something, but then you see nothing is going to change after all? What then? Meanwhile, the people around you continue to talk and act as if you were the same person as yesterday, or last night, or 5 minutes before, but you are really undergoing a crisis. Your heart feels damaged. The past is unclear. It's as if there's a film over those early years. I can't even be sure that the things I remember happening really happened to me. There was a girl who had a mother and a father. A father ran a small cafe where the mother acted as a waitress and cashier, who moved as if in a dream through grade school and high school, and then, in a year or two, into secretarial school. Later, much later, what happened to the time in between? She is in another town working as a receptionist for an electronics parts firm and becomes acquainted with one of the engineers who asks her for a date. Eventually, seeing that it's his aim, she lets him seduce her. She had an intuition at the time, an insight about the seduction that later, try as she might, she couldn't recall. After a short while they decided to get married, but already the past, her past, is slipping away. The future is something she can't imagine. She smiles as if she has a secret when she thinks about the future. Once, during a particularly bad argument over what she can't now remember, 5 years or so after they were married, he tells her that someday this affair, his words, this affair, will end in violence. She remembers this. She files that away somewhere and begins repeating it aloud from time to time. Sometimes she spends the whole morning on her knees in the sandbox behind the garage, playing with Dean and one or two of his friends. But every afternoon, at 4 o'clock, her head begins to hurt. She holds her forehead and feels dizzy with the pain. Stuart asks her to see a doctor, and she does, secretly pleased that the doctor's solicitous, solicitous, I don't know how to say this one, but I guess he is giving her attention in a way of soliciting? Can't pronounce it. She goes away for a while to a place the doctor recommends. Oh, she went through a lot of stuff she's glossing over here. Stuart's mother comes out from Ohio in a hurry to care for the child, but she, Claire, spoils everything and returns home in a few weeks. His mother moves out of the house and takes an apartment across town and perches there, as if waiting. One night in bed, when they are both near asleep, Claire tells him that she heard some women patients in the clinic discussing fellatio. She thinks this is something he might like to hear. Stuart is pleased at hearing this. He strokes her arm. Things are going to be okay, he says. From now on, everything is going to be different and better for them. He has received a promotion and a substantial raise. They've even bought another car, a station wagon, her car. They're going to live in the they're going to live in the here and now. He says he feels able to relax for the first time in years. In the dark, he goes on stroking her arm. He continues to bowl and play cards regularly. He goes fishing with three friends of his. That evening, three things happen. Dean says that the children at school told him that his father found a dead body in the river. He wants to know about it. Stewart explains, quickly, leaving out most of the story, saying only that yes, he and three other men did find a body while they were fishing. What kind of body? Dean asks. Was it a girl? Yes, it was a girl. A woman. Then we called the sheriff. Stewart looks at me. What'd he say? Dean asks. He said he'd take care of it. What did it look like? Was it scary? That's enough talk, I say. Rinse your plate, Dean, and then you're excused. But what did it look like? He persists. I want to know. You heard me, I said. Did you hear me, Dean? Dean! I want to shake him. I want to shake him until he cries. Do what your mother says, Stewart tells him quietly. It was just a body, and that's all there is to it. I'm clearing the table when Stewart comes up behind and touches my arm. His fingers burn. I start almost losing a plate. What's the matter with you? He says. Oh, wait, no, I think I'm supposed to read this differently. I start almost losing a plate. What's the matter with you? He says, dropping his hand. Claire, what is it? You scared me, I say. That's what I mean. I should be able to touch you without you jumping out of your skin. He stands in front of me with a little grin, trying to catch my eyes. Then he puts his arm around my waist. With his other hand, he takes my free hand and puts it on the front of his pants. Please, Stewart. I pull away and he steps back and snaps his fingers. Hell with it then, he says. But that way if you want. Oh, be that way if you want. But just remember. Remember what? I say quickly. Look at him and hold my breath. He shrugs. Nothing. Nothing, he says. The second thing that happened is that while we were watching television that evening, he in his leather recliner chair, I on the sofa, with a blanket and a magazine, the house quiet except for the television, a voice cuts into the program to say that the murder girl has been identified. Full details will follow on the 11 o'clock news. We look at each other. In a few minutes he gets up and says he's going to fix a nightcap. Do I want one? No, I say. I don't mind drinking alone, he says. I thought I'd ask. I can see he's mm, I can see he is obscurely hurt, and I look away, ashamed and yet angry at the same time. He stays in the kitchen a long while, but comes back with his drink just when the news begins. First, the announcer repeats the story of the four local fishermen finding the body. Then the station shows a high school graduation photograph of the girl, a dark-haired girl with a round face and full, smiling lips. That's a film of the girl's parent. There is a film of this There's a film of the girl's parents entering the funeral home to make the identification. Bewildered, sad, they shuffle slowly up the sidewalk to the front steps to where a man in a dark suit stands waiting, holding the door. Then, it seems as if only seconds have passed, as if they have merely gone inside the door and turned around and come out again. The same couple is shown leaving the building, the woman in tears, covering her face with a handkerchief, the man stopping long enough to say to a reporter, It's her! It's Susan! I can't say anything right now. I hope they get a person or persons who did it before it happens again. This violence, feebly he motions feebly at the television camera. Then the man and woman get into an old car and drive away into the late afternoon traffic. The announcer goes on to say that the girl, Susan Miller, had gotten off work as a cashier in a movie theater in Summit, a town 120 miles north of our town. A green, late model car pulled up in front of the theater and the girl, who according to witnesses looked as if she'd been waiting, went over to the car and got in, leading the authorities to suspect that the driver of the car was a friend or at least an acquaintance. The authorities would like to talk to the driver of the green car. Stewart clears his throat. then leans back in the chair and sips his drink. The third thing that happened is that after the news, Stuart stretches, yawns, and looks at me. I get up and begin making a bed for myself on the sofa. "What are you doing?" he says, puzzled. "I'm not sleepy," I say, avoiding his eyes. "I think I'll stay up a while longer and then read something until I fall asleep." He stares as I spread a sheet over the sofa. When I start to go for a pillow, he stands at the bedroom door, blocking the way. "I'm going to ask you once more," he says. "What the hell do you think you're going to accomplish by this?" "I need to be by myself tonight," I say. "I need to have time to think." He lets out breath. "I'm thinking you're making a big mistake by doing this." "I'm thinking you better think again about what you're doing, Claire." I can't answer. I don't know what I want to say. I turn and begin to tuck in the edges of the blanket. He stares at me a minute longer, and then I see him raise his shoulders. "Suit yourself, then. Could give a fuck less what you do," he says. He turns and walks down the hall, scratching his neck. It feels there's a very intense realism to this convo and these behaviors. I can picture all of this. The morning I read in the This morning I read in the paper that services for Susan Miller are to be held in Chapel of the Pines Summit at 2 o'clock the next afternoon. Also, that police have taken statements from 3 people who saw her get into the green Chevrolet, but they still have no license number for the car. They are getting warmer, though, and the investigation is continuing. I sit for a long while holding the paper, thinking. Then I call to make an appointment at the hairdresser's. I sit under the dryer with a magazine on my lap and let Millie do my nails. "I'm going to a funeral tomorrow," I say after we have talked a bit about a girl who no longer works there. Millie looks up at me and then back at my fingers. "I'm sorry to hear that, Miss Kane." "I'm real sorry." "It's a young girl's funeral," I say. "That's the worst kind. My sister died when I was a girl, and I'm still not over it to this day." "Who died?" she says after a minute. "A girl. We weren't all that close, but still." "Too bad. I'm real sorry. But we'll get you fixed up for that, don't worry. How's that look?" "That looks fine." "Millie, did you ever wish you were somebody else? Or else just nobody? Nothing? Nothing at all?" She looks at me. "Can't say I ever felt that, no. No, if I was somebody else, I'd be afraid I might not look like who I was." She holds my fingers and seems to think about something for a minute. "I don't know. I just don't know. Let me have your other hand now, Mrs. Kane." At 11 o'clock that night, I make another bet on the sofa. This time, Stuart only looks at me, rolls his tongue behind his lips, goes down the hall to the bedroom. In the night, I awake and listen to the wind slamming the gate against the fence. I don't want to be awake and alive for a long while with my eyes closed. Finally, I get up and go down the hall with my pillow. The light is burning on our bedroom, and Stuart is on his back with his mouth open, breathing heavily. I go into Dean's room and get into bed with him. In his sleep, he moves over to give me space. I lie there for a minute and then hold him, my face against his hair. "What is it, Mama?" he says. "Nothing, honey. Go back to sleep. It's nothing. It's all right." I get up when I hear Stuart's alarm, put on coffee, and prepare breakfast while he shaves. He appears in the kitchen doorway, towel over his bare shoulder, praising. "Here's coffee," I say. "Eggs will be ready in a minute." He nods. I wake Dean and the 3 of us have breakfast. Once or twice Stuart looks at me as if he wants to say something, but each time I ask Dean if he wants more milk, more toast, etc. "I'll call you today," Stuart says as he opens the door. "I don't think I'll be home today," I say quickly. "I have a lot of things to do today. In fact, I may be late for dinner." "All right, sure." He moves his briefcase from one hand to the other. "Maybe we'll go out for dinner tonight? How would you like that?" He keeps looking at me. He's forgotten about the girl already. "How? Are you all right?" I move to straighten his tie, then drop my hand. He wants to kiss me goodbye. I move back a step. Have a nice day then, he says finally. He turns and goes down the walk to his car. I dress carefully. I try on a hat that I haven't worn in several years and look at myself in the mirror. Then I remove the hat, apply a light makeup, and write a note for Dean. Honey, Mommy has gone Mommy has things to do this afternoon, but we'll be home later. You are to stay in the house or in the backyard until one of us comes home. Love. I look at the word love and then I underline it. As I'm writing the note, I realize I don't know whether backyard is one word or two. I think about it and then I draw a line and make two words of it. And in the note, it's actually written backslash yard. Very weird. I stop for gas and ask directions to Summit. Barry, 40-year-old mechanic with a mustache, comes out from the restroom and leans against the front fender while the other man, Lewis, puts the hose into the tank and begins to slowly wash the windshield. Summit, Barry says, looking at me, smoothing a finger down each side of his mustache. There's no best way to get to Summit, Mrs. Kane. It's about a 2.5 hour drive each way, across the mountains. It's quite a drive for a woman. Summit? What's in Summit, Mrs. Kane? I have business, I say, vaguely uneasy. Lewis has gone to wait on another customer. Ah, well, if I wasn't tied up there, he gestures with his thumb toward the bay, I'd offer to drive you to Summit and back again. The road's not all that good. I mean, it's good enough. There's just a lot of curves and so on. I'll be all right, but thank you. He leans against the fender. I can feel his eyes as I open my purse. Barry takes the credit card. Don't drive it at night, he says. It's not all that good a road, like I said, and while I'd be willing to bet you wouldn't have a car trouble with this, I know this car. You can never be sure about blowouts and things like that. Just to be on the safe side, I'd better check these tires. He taps one of the front tires with his shoe. We'll run it into the hoist. Won't take long. No, no, it's all right. Really, I can't take any more time. The tires look fine to me. Only takes a minute, he says. Be on the safe side. I said no. No. They look fine to me. I have to go now. Barry, Mrs. Kane, I have to go now. I sign something. He gives me the receipt, the card, some stamps. Put everything into my purse. You take it easy, he says. Be seeing you. As I wait to pull into the traffic, I look back and see him watching. I close my eyes, then open them. He waves. I turn at the first light, then turn again and drive until I come to the highway and read the sign. Summit, 117 miles. Oh, that's a long, long trip. 2.5 hours through winding mountains. Oof. It is 10:30 and warm. The highway skirts the edge of town, then passes through farm country, through fields of oats and sugar beets and apple orchards, with here and there a small herd of cattle grazing in the open pastures. Then everything changes. The farms become fewer and fewer, more like shacks now than houses, and stands of timber replace the orchards. All at once I'm in the mountains, and on the right, far below, I catch glimpses of the Natchez River. In a little while I see a green pickup truck behind me, and it stays behind me for miles. I keep slowing at the wrong times, hoping it will pass, and then increasing my speed, again in the wrong times. I grip the wheel until my fingers hurt. Then on a then on a clear stretch he does pass, but he drives along beside for a minute, a crew-cut man in a blue work shirt in his early 30s, and we look at each other. Then he waves, toots the horn twice, and pulls ahead of me. I slow down and find a place, a dirt road off the shoulder. I pull over and turn off the ignition. I can hear the river somewhere down below the trees. Ahead of me the dirt road goes into the trees. Then I hear the pickup returning. I start the engine just as the truck pulls up behind me. I lock the doors and roll up the windows. Perspiration breaks on my face and arms as I put put the car in gear, but there is no place to drive. You all right? The man says as he comes up to my car. Hello. Hello in there. He raps the glass. You okay? He leans his arm on the door and brings his face close to the window. I stare at him and can't find any words. After I passed, I slowed up some. Oh, sorry. I stare at him and can't find any words. After I passed, I slowed up some, he says. But when I didn't see you in the mirror, I pulled off and waited a couple of minutes. When you still didn't show, I thought I'd better drive back and check. Is everything all right? How come you're locked up in there? I shake my head. Come on, roll down your window. Hey, are you sure you're okay? You know it's not good for a woman to be batting around the country by herself. He shakes his head and looks at the highway, then back at me. Now come on, roll down the window. How about it? We can't talk this way. Is he genuinely trying to help, or is this just some creepy dude who's accosting a woman on the side of the road? Stay tuned to find out. Or maybe we won't find out. Please, I have to go. Open the door, all right? He says, as if he isn't listening. At least roll the window down. You're going to you're going to smother in there. He looks at my breasts and legs. The skirt is pulled up over my knees. His eyes linger on my legs, but I sit still, afraid to move. I want to smother, I say. I am smothering. Can't you see? What in the hell? He says and moves back from the door. He turns and walks back to his truck. Then in the side mirror, I watch him returning, and I close my eyes. You don't want me to follow you towards Summit or anything? I don't mind. I got some extra time this morning, he says. I shake my head. He hesitates and then shrugs. Okay, lady, have it your way, he says. Okay. I wait until he reaches the highway, and then I back out. He shifts gears and pulls away slowly, looking back at me in the rearview mirror. I stop the car on the shoulder and put my head on the wheel. The casket is closed and covered with floral sprays. The organ begins soon after I take a seat near the back of the chapel. People begin to file in and find chairs, some middle-aged and older people, but most of them in their early 20s or even younger. They are people who look uncomfortable in their suits and ties, sports coats and slacks, their dark dresses and leather gloves. One boy in flared pants and a yellow short-sleeved shirt takes the chair next to mine and begins to bite his lips. A door opens at one side of the chapel, and I look up, and for a minute the parking lot reminds me of a meadow. But then the sun flashes on car windows. The family enters in a group and moves into a curtained area off to the side. Chairs creak as they settle themselves. In a few minutes a slim, blond man in a dark suit stands and asks us to bow our head. He speaks a brief prayer for us, the living, and when he finishes, he asks us to pray in silence for the soul of Susan Miller, departed. I close my eyes and remember her picture in the newspaper and on television. I see her leaving the theater and getting into the green Chevrolet. Then I imagine her journey down the river, the nude body hitting rocks, caught at by branches, the body floating and turning, her hair streaming in the water. Then the hands and hair catching in the overhanging branches, holding until four men come along to stare at her. I can see a man who is drunk, Stewart, take her by the wrist. Does anyone here know about that? What if these people knew that? I look around at the other faces. There is a connection to be made of these things, these events, these faces, if I can find it. My head aches with the effort to find it. He talks about Susan Miller's gifts, cheerfulness and beauty, grace and enthusiasm. From behind the close curtain, someone clears his throat. Someone else sobs. The organ music begins. The service is over. Along with the others, I file slowly past the casket. Then I move out onto the front steps and into the bright, hot afternoon light. A middle-aged woman who limps as she goes down the stairs ahead of me reaches the sidewalk and looks around, her eyes falling on me. Well, they got him, she says, if that's any consolation. They arrested him this morning. I heard it on the radio before I came. A guy right here in town. A long hair, you might have guessed. We move a few steps down the hot sidewalk. People are starting cars. I put out my hand and hold on to the parking meter. Sunlight glances off polished hoods and fenders. My head swims. He's admitting having relations with her that night, but he says he didn't kill her. She snorts. I'll put him in probation and then turn him loose. He might not have acted alone, I say. They'll have to be sure. He might be covering up for someone, a brother or some friends. I've known that child since she was a little girl, the woman goes on, and her lips tremble. She used to come over and I'd bake cookies for her and let her eat them in front of the TV. She looks off and begins shaking her head as her tears roll down her cheeks. Stuart sits at the table with a drink in front of him. His eyes are red, and for a minute I think he has been crying. He looks at me and doesn't say anything. For a wild instant I feel something has happened to Dean, and my heart turns. Where is he? I say. Where's Dean? Outside, he says. Stuart, I'm so afraid, so afraid, I say, leaning against the door. What are you afraid of, Claire? Tell me, honey, and maybe I can help. I'd like to help. Just try me. That's what husbands are for. I can't explain, I say. I'm just afraid. I feel like. He drains his glass and stands up, not taking his eyes from me. I think I know what you need, honey. Let me play doctor, okay? Just take it easy now. He reaches an arm around my waist and with his other hand begins to unbutton my jacket, then my blouse. First things first, he says, trying to joke. Not now, please, I say. Not now, please, he says, teasing. Please nothing. Then he steps behind me and locks an arm around my waist. One of his hands slips under my brassiere. Stop, 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 I say. Stamp on his toes. And then I am lifted up and then falling. I sit on the floor looking up at him and my neck hurts and my skirt is over my knees. He leans down and says, You go to hell then. Do you hear, bitch? Hope your cunt drops off before I touch it again. Yikes. I hope your cunt drops off before I touch it again. Damn. He sobs once again and I realize I can't help it. He can't help himself either. I feel a rush of pity for him as he heads for the living room. He didn't sleep at home last night. This morning, flowers, red and yellow chrysanthemums. What? Hold on, let's go back a little bit. He sobs once I realize he can't help it. He can't help himself either. I feel a rush of pity for him as he heads for the living room. So she thinks he's just acting out for whatever internal reason issue he's having. This is what I don't understand. He didn't sleep at home last night. This morning, flowers, red and yellow chrysanthemums. I'm drinking coffee when the doorbell rings. Mrs. Kane? The young man says, holding his box of flowers. I nod and pull the robe tighter at my throat. The man who called, he said you'd know. The boy looked at my robe, open at the throat, and touches his cap. He stands with his legs apart, feet firmly planted on the top step. Have a nice day, he says. A little later, the telephone rings and Stuart says, Honey, how are you? I'll be home early. I love you. Did you hear me? I love you. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you. Goodbye. I have to run now. I put the flowers into a vase in the center of the dining room table, and then I move my things into the extra bedroom. Last night around midnight, Stuart breaks the lock on my door. He does it just to show me that he can, I suppose, for he doesn't do anything when the door springs open except stand there in his underwear, looking surprised and foolish while the anger slips from his face. He shuts the door slowly, and a few minutes later I hear him in the kitchen prying open a tray of ice cubes. I'm in bed when he calls today to tell me that he's asked his mother to come stay with us for a few days. I wait a minute, thinking about this, and then hang up while he is still talking. But in a little while I dial his number at work. When he finally comes on the line, I say, It doesn't matter, Stuart. Really. I tell you, it doesn't matter one way or the other. I love you, he says. He says something else, and I listen and nod slowly. I feel sleepy. Then I wake up and say, For God's sake, Stuart, She was only a child. That's the end. Not, what was it called? So much water, so close to home. I like this story, and I hope you all enjoy. Until next time, take care.